This is Father Gregory Pine, and welcome to Godsplaining. Thanks to all those who support us. If you enjoy the show, please consider making a monthly donation on Patreon. Be sure to like and subscribe to Godsplaining wherever you listen to your podcasts. For this episode of Guestplaining, very delighted to have with us Professor Christopher Kaczor. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So you have been on Godsplaining before, as well as on the Thomistic Institute podcast. I mean, you have accolades to your name, which far outpace appearances on either of those podcasts. But professor of philosophy at Loyola Marymount University, presently on a fellowship at Notre Dame. But for those who don't know, you could say a word of kind of who you are and what's good in life.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in Seattle, and then I went to Boston College, and then left for Notre Dame for graduate school. And then after that, my wife and I went to Germany for a year. I was a von Humboldt Fellow at the University of Cologne.
Okay.
And then I took a job at Loyola New Orleans, and then took my job at Loyola Marymount. And since I've been there since 1998, but I've also traveled a lot in between. So I spent a year at Princeton and a year at the Catholic University of America, and spent a year in another year in Germany as a Fulbright scholar. So we've kind of traveled around and been around a lot. And what else can I say about myself?
You have 7 children?
I do. I have 7 kids.
Who's your favorite?
Oh, that's easy. That's a bad question to ask.
Yeah, I like to ask
I
parents
love them all.
Who their favorite kid is, and then whether they like their kids.
Okay, yeah.
Because like most parents are like, why would you ask that? It's like, I didn't ask you if you loved them. I know that answer.
That's right.
Do you like them?
I normally do.
Nice.
I normally do. I would say there are days when I'm not liking one or the other, depending what's happening. But yeah, in general, I like all of them. Yeah.
That's cool. That's a blessing.
Yeah, it is for sure. Yeah.
So 7 for 7. Kudos. Who did you write your dissertation with?
His name's Ralph McInerney. He was a professor at Notre Dame for 53 years, and he directed 48 dissertations. It's the record at the University of Notre Dame for most dissertations ever advised. Okay. And he was a fantastic guy, as I'm sure you know, a great Thomist scholar, and himself an author of 150 books.
Wow.
Yes. He wrote 100 nonfiction works, so novels and mysteries and things like that, and then 50 works of philosophy and theology and history. So he was a very prolific guy, super nice, always had time for me, very, very supportive of his students. You know, he'd give us laptops and take us to lunch and find extra money for us. He was a real model for me, and I think about him literally every day. Every day I have a little thing I write out about, you know, who I want to be like. And he's one of 3 people that is, in terms of, you know, my model for what kind of person I want to be is, on that list. So he's an unbelievable guy.
Wow. Was he married? Did he have children?
He was married. He had 7 kids.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool. Now that's coincidence. I didn't have 7 kids simply to imitate Ralph McInerney. It was rather to imitate Captain Von Trapp.
There you go. Okay. Noble imitation. Do you know, like, different people have different work habits? Did he typically write in the mornings, in the evenings, late at night? Do you know how to
I do know his work habits. So he wrote in the morning, but he in particular wrote late at night. So when he was a young professor at Notre Dame, at the time, his salary was quite low. And, you know, you have 6, 7 kids. It's hard to make ends meet, even in South Bend, Indiana. So what he would do is he would, have his normal work day at Notre Dame, come home, be with family, put the kids to bed, say goodnight to his wife, and then he'd go down into the basement of his house at about 10 o'clock at night and write every night from 10 o'clock at night to about 2 in the morning, working on his nonfiction primarily. And he basically said, I'm going to try this for a year, and if I don't get anything published, I'm going to, have to work as a cab driver or do something else to make extra money.
Wow. But
he started writing these short stories and sending them off to Red Book and other magazines, and he got something accepted, so he kept on doing it, and then eventually this led to this very prolific and productive writing career where, as I said, he had 100 nonfiction books. Yeah. Mostly, his most famous nonfiction work are the Father Dowling murder mysteries, and they were made into a TV show in the 80s.
Okay.
So that was his most famous thing. But he wrote a whole bunch of things. He wrote a whole bunch of books set at Notre Dame. So yeah, he was great. He's a great, great man.
To write from 10 p.m. till 2 a.m. each day sounds like for somebody with ordinary human capacities would prove insupportable. Just like you'd wake up every morning increasingly tired, potentially sad. Did he carried it off well enough?
I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I couldn't do that. I mean, not even close. I mean, if for me, it gets about 10 o'clock, 10:30, I am totally wiped out and I can barely do anything. So I couldn't even think of doing that. But he was made of stronger metal than I am. So he was able to do a lot of things I can't do.
Yeah. Okay. But apropos of writing books, apropos of, like managing to produce in various registers. I should not introduce this sentence with all kinds of subordinate clauses before I actually make known the subject and the verb, but you have written many books and many articles, and you seem to do it both with efficacy as concerns like theological and philosophical sciences, but also with a certain levity. I don't know, like the way that you describe your relationship with writing, there's a kind of, I don't know if detachment's the right word because that sounds sterile, but an abandonment or so it seems to me. I remember you describing your writing habits at one point for a Thomistic Institute conference in Colorado in 2020. Yeah. You're like, you just write. And then the next day you write some more. Mm-hmm. And then, so where have you kind of like in your own writing, I mean, in your own kind of academic career and as the publications have come in turn, what do you see as like, what have been the yields of that or what have been the fruits of that? Maybe in terms of the products themselves, but also in terms of your own kind of formation and maturation?
Yeah, so for me, I really enjoy writing, and I know that may sound to people like, I enjoy taking ice baths or something. I mean, how could you possibly enjoy writing? But I do. I mean, when I write, it's sort of like all the things I'm dealing with, the bills and troubles and whatever, all go away, and I'm just focused on what I'm writing. And I usually am working on multiple things at a time, and so not always, but often I've got basically a scholarly project going on and a essay for general audiences going on. Yeah. So I kind of have both things happening. And then a few years ago, Bishop Barron asked me to work with Word on Fire. So for him, I write basically 2 essays a month at every other week, basically. And so, so I'm basically always working on an essay for that. Although actually at the moment I'm not. I just turned in the essays I had. And so right now I don't have anything really, well, I kind of do. Actually, that's not true. I actually do kind of have something kind of rough draft-ish. But yeah, as I mentioned in that conference that you were at, I think of writing a little bit like, think about like making a snowman. Like if you think about a whole snowman, it might be kind of intimidating. Like, God, it's a big thing and how am I going to do this? But everybody can make a snowball, right? It's this tiny thing and it just takes a little bit of time. So I think of writing a little bit like that. If you think about writing a book, it's like, oh my gosh, a book, it's long, and how am I ever going to do this? And that seems like a ton. But, almost everyone has written email, you've written letters to your grandma, so I think of writing more like that, like you're writing just a little chunk. And the way I do it basically is every morning, take time to write. And I always do it first thing. So I get to my office and I don't return email, I don't return phone calls, I don't make appointment with students, I don't schedule classes. So every day I get to the office, let's say 8 o'clock, and close the door, and I write, my scholarly thing that I'm working on. I work on the popular thing I'm working on. If I'm being good, I'll have a third thing I'm working on. So usually I try to have 2 things going. Sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 1, but usually try to have 2. And for me, it's great because the more you write, the more creativity you'll have. When I was in graduate school, they had a seminar for scholarly productivity, and they brought in these scholars to study, and they said to one group of professors, okay, we want you to write down a good idea whenever you have one. And the second group, they said, we want you to write Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and you write down a good idea whenever you have one. And the last group, they said, we want you to write Monday through Friday, 5 days a week, and you write down a good idea whenever you have one. And the first group had the fewest self-reported good ideas. The second group had way more. And the third had by far the most. So basically, the very process of writing things down stimulates creativity. Yeah. And so that's, that's why I've been doing it in that way. And that's certainly what Ralph McInerney did. It's actually what Alistair McIntyre does. I mean, there's quite a few scholars that I respect a lot that have this sort of habit of writing every day, because writing is a way of thinking and thinking through problems and stuff.
Yeah, I think When you consider the various ways in which people get tripped up or kind of paralyzed, like for instance, you might be conscious of the fact that you don't know the subject matter perfectly or exhaustively, and then like the prospect of writing something about said subject without sufficient knowledge of the secondary literature or where people are at present on the issue might keep you from saying something, insofar as it couldn't possibly engage with interlocutors in a way that's subtle, in a way that's refined, in a way that's like people talk themselves out of it often enough. It sounds like there has to be, I don't know exactly what the virtue is, but you have to be kind of like self-forgetful, or I don't know, like how do you develop a kind of healthy sense that what I write might be good, it might not be good, it may or may not matter, but it's worthwhile. Like, I don't know, how do you, I mean, you like it, so that's one thing, it kind of drives itself to a certain extent, but like, how do you develop a healthy, maybe distance from your work, or, I'm just thinking of like my own, when I was writing my dissertation, it's like I was trying to do bibliographic exhaustion on a number of issues as they pertain to it, and it was just like, by the end of it, I was just like, you get to a certain point where you have a basic sense as to what they're saying in the secondary literature.
That's right.
And you probably read for too long in order to arrive at that recognition, so I don't know, like maybe it's a matter of enunciating a hierarchy of values or like a hierarchy of goods that are at stake. So what is at stake?
So I would distinguish quite clearly between scholarly writing and writing aimed at a general audience. So in a scholarly work like a PhD dissertation, it is part of writing a scholarly thing to have some sense of the lay of the land. And you're absolutely right that you could spend forever getting the lay of the land of the scholarly literature. If you take any big topic, let's say, does God exist? You could read until you died every single day for 12 hours a day and not read everything that's written about that issue, because it's like everyone's written about it. It's a huge issue. So what I do is, you already mentioned basically what I do is basically I read a lot. And then once I start reading something, it's like, oh, well, this is kind of another version of that. This is kind of another version of that. It's sort of like you're hearing more or less just different iterations of the same view. Well, at that point, I know I've read enough, right? And what I do always is start with the most recent literature. And the reason for that is not that what is written most recently is best, but rather that if something's written recently, that can point you to things written earlier. Whereas if you start off an article in 1950, obviously they can't refer to any article written in 2005.
Yep.
So I start with the most recent essays, and I'll read maybe, so say after I write an article in bioethics about cloning, and let's say I haven't really written anything about cloning. So I would read, let's say, 5 to 10 articles written most recently, the last year, ideally, about cloning. And then basically, if I read about 10 articles, I'll rapidly figure out, okay, well, this is the lay of the land in the contemporary debate. These are the key figures that people are interacting with. These are the key arguments that, because if you read 10 articles, you'll see, oh, these are all 10 of these articles, 7 of them talk about scholar so-and-so. So scholar so-and-so is clearly one of the key voices in this debate. And then, 10 of the articles, well, 4 of them talked about this other scholar. Okay, that's another key scholar. So then with the key arguments, the key scholars, I'll go deeper and read, maybe 10 articles by each of those key scholars, or 10 articles about that key point in the debate. But if you do that, basically, you don't have to read everything since the beginning of time about whatever, because again, if you do that, you'll never start.
Yeah.
Right? Because you'd be like, well, I want to work about cloning. Okay, well, Leon Kass wrote about that, so I'll read everything he wrote. And then what did Leon Kass read? Well, he read Kant. I better read everything Kant wrote. And then who'd Kant read? Well, Kant read, some ancient Greeks. So I better go back to the pre-Socratics and read everything the pre-Socratics wrote. And then, well, how do we interpret the pre-Socratics? Well, there's a secondary literature on that. So I better read that. You can see, you'll never start. The other thing that to keep in mind is that the perfect can destroy the good. And so perfectionism is really an enemy. And so I have a motto that actually I learned from another professor at Notre Dame named Jean Porter, who's a scholar of Aquinas too. And her motto was, when in doubt, send it out. So you get to doing something and you basically, okay, I'm not sure whether I should send this out, send it out. And it's a win-win situation because you send it out and it gets accepted as a scholarly article. Well, that's nice. it gets rejected, but you get critical comments back telling you, hey, work on A, B, C, and D, that's good too.
Yeah.
Because especially if you work on something for a long time, you can be so close to it, so engaged with it, that actually you need distance that you can't gain yourself without time. So you could gain that distance from your own work if you put it aside and waited 10 years and came back to it. But probably you don't want to wait 10 years.
Yep.
But you send it out to some reader who doesn't know you, well, the reader will be able to give you a different perspective on it. And that doesn't mean that reader's always right, of course, but often readers are right. And even if they're totally wrong, at least that tells you how at least one reader can misread your work so that hopefully you can adjust it to avoid that misreading.
Yeah. Okay, thinking then like about popular work, I realize that popular work can go off the rails in various ways. I think that there's a kind of risk of, guruism or demagoguery or kind of insufficiently researched or not so well-informed opinions just making their way onto the published page. So as like a responsible member of the philosophical or the theological guild, you want your popular work to be informed by your research, but you also want to communicate with a broader audience. So what's involved in that translation, or maybe is it false to conceive of it as a kind of translation from the scholarly to the popular? Because if you start in the scholarly, maybe you never end up in the popular. You have to just start in the popular in order to arrive at the popular. But how is it that you write for a popular audience, conscious of the fact that maybe some of your colleagues will read this and you don't want to like blush?
Yeah. So I do try to write for both a scholarly audience and a popular audience. But when I'm writing something, I am conscious of the difference. So in a work for a popular audience, I'm not going to have Latin footnotes. I'm not going to be citing, German passages. I'm not going to be delving into arcania and responding to every possible objection the way I would do for a more scholarly audience. So I keep in mind like who I'm writing to. And then also in articles for general audiences, I try to use more images, more analogies, more humor, put in jokes, things like that. Well, I don't put jokes into my scholarly papers, at least not intentionally. So there's a real difference of audience, and I think both things are valuable. And I totally respect that some people only want to write for a popular audience or only can. And I totally respect that some people only want to write for a scholarly audience or only can write for them. But I guess like my mentor, Ralph McInerney, aim to reach out to both audiences. And I find them actually mutually informing in this way, that there are a number of times I've written something for a scholarly audience and then boiled it down to the essence to communicate to a more general audience. Mm-hmm. Now, the other way is harder to do. So, for instance, I've written about Kant for a general audience, but I've never written a scholarly article about Kant. Why? Well, because I don't have the necessary scholarly background to do that. I mean, I can't read German. I have read Kant in German, but I don't know. Like if you say, well, name the top, 10 Kant scholars in the world. Like I can name maybe 2 Kant scholars, and I'm not even sure that the 2 top Kant scholars in the world. So it's like, I'm just not an expert in Kant. And virtually no one can be an expert in all the fields of philosophy and all the major figures in philosophy. I say virtually no one because there are some people like Alistair McIntyre that seem to be more or less an expert in all these different areas. But that's extremely unusual, right? I mean, how many people are Alistair McIntyre?
One.
Exactly.
Or so it seems.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, maybe a further question is, from whence the drive or like the motivation to keep writing? I suppose on the level of personal development, you can always understand better and communicate better. And so that can be, especially as like a pedagogue, as a teacher, there's got to be motivation there to get better at your craft, to get better at your art, and to do so by way of conceptual clarity, more and more refined conceptual clarity. But there are other ways of going about that rather than publishing. So it seems like there has to be something after the manner of a kind of altruism or generosity, or, in more crass examples, a slavish need for honor or for glory of some sort. A lot of people set for themselves proximate goals, and then arriving at said proximate goal think, okay, what next? Like I remember after I defended my dissertation, I had the pretty potent thought. Like, there are no more professions, there are no more ordinations, there are no more academic degrees. Today is the first day of the rest of your life. You know, so like, you'd better love it.
Yeah.
So like, where does writing fit in your life in its current configuration, or like what drives that?
I would say a few things. So one of the things is questions that I have. So I wrote this book called "Is Belief Believable?" and then it was sent to readers, and it's meant for a general audience. And one of the readers said, "Hey, you don't address the problem that some people talk about, that God is hidden." And the basic idea, if people don't know what that means, you know what it means, but maybe people that are listening don't. The basic idea is, well, look, why doesn't God just manifest himself in a totally obvious way so that everyone's just like, yes, of course God exists. So there are no debates among people about whether the sun exists. It's like, look, every morning you go out there and there's the sun, and it's like it's like totally obvious. No one debates whether, I don't know, Mount St. Helens exists. It's like, there it is. It's a big thing. It's right there. So, why doesn't God just manifest himself just plainly? And then everyone would say, hey, well, there's God. And I'd heard this issue before, but I'd never really thought about it much. And this reader said, hey, this is something people are concerned about, and why don't you think about it? So that made me think about it. I thought, okay, well, if I want the book to be as good as it can be, then I probably should put something in there about the hiddenness of God. So then I basically read some stuff about it from scholars and thought about it, and came up with what I think is a reasonable way to think about it. So I can tell you about that if you want. But
I'm interested. Did you read the article by Travis Dumsday in the American Catholic Philosophical Quarterly?
I didn't read that, no.
I wandered into the library at one point, maybe 10 years ago, picked that up and read it, and it had like a pretty profound impact. I'm sure you encountered similar argumentation elsewhere, but the basic idea is that God's mode of revelation and mediation is eminently well suited to our human condition. Mm-hmm. So it's like God communicates in the way that best suits our maturation, in effect. But to think about kind of God's mode of revelation and mediation as parabolic. Mm-hmm. He mixes the clear with the obscure as a way by which to elicit further inquiry, which inquiry then lays more firm hold on the things of God. For whatever reason, I think it's true, but for whatever reason, it just really gripped me when I read it.
Yeah. I haven't read that. I probably should. It sounds interesting. My way of thinking about it actually begins with a Steve Martin movie. Have you ever seen the Steve Martin movie, The Man with Two Brains?
No.
Okay, so there's a scene in there where Steve Martin plays a widower. So his wife's dead, and he goes before a portrait of his deceased wife, and he started dating this new woman. And so he says to his deceased wife, Rebecca, if there's any reason I shouldn't pursue this new relationship, just let me know. And all of a sudden the lights start blinking, and there's a huge wind that picks up, and the portrait starts spinning around on the wall, and a voice from the grave, his dead wife's voice from the grave, comes out, no, no, no. And this goes on for 15 seconds. And then everything stops, and Martin's all disheveled from the winds and stuff, and the portrait's askew. And he looks at the portrait, and he says, just any sign. I'll wait for it. And he walks out. And Sartre has this interesting line about any sign needs to be interpreted. And so I think basically that sometimes people are looking for signs from God, but they may have a kind of cognitive processing grid that basically excludes them from really taking seriously any signs that do come from God, just like Steve Martin in that little skit. So there's skeptics like Bertrand Russell had this near-death experience where there's this red light that Bertrand Russell says, I knew this was the ruler of the world, and it was accusatory and this and that and all this stuff. And then at the end, he didn't actually die. He came back. He's like, well, I probably just a brain problem or something. So it's like, you literally have this huge sign, and you just kind of explained it away. And that's because we, process things in light of, our beliefs and our desires and such. So example of this is I don't know if you've heard of the gorilla test before. Mm-hmm. So the gorilla test, you can look it up online. So you have 5 basketball players wearing white jerseys, 5 basketball players wearing black jerseys, and both teams have a basketball, and they're basically passing the basketball back and forth. So the white players in the white jerseys passing to each other, players in the black jerseys passing to each other. And you're asked as a viewer to count how many times that people wearing the white shirts pass the basketball. So you're, watching this and trying to count, okay, 5. And then the video stops after about a minute. And people say, oh, I think it was 15 times, 13, 16, whatever. In the middle of this thing, there's a person in a gorilla costume that walks through the middle of this sort of chaos of people throwing the basketball. And you get more than half of people watching the video that don't see the person in the gorilla costume. So the point is, part of what we see is influenced by our beliefs, our desires, what we're focusing on, things like that. And so, why is God hidden? Well, I think God's really not hidden, but many people in daily life don't have the kind of attunement to sort of, be aware of this. And then you might say, well, why doesn't God just appear to us in all God's beauty, in all God's grandeur, and, just appear face to face to us? And I think God does do that, and that's called the beatific vision. But as you know, at the beatific vision, at least according to Aquinas, the person can no longer choose not to love God. You're, as it were, locked into loving God. If you really saw God face to face, your freedom to not love God or not love neighbor is no longer operative. So God arguably allows us or hides from us, doesn't appear to us face to face in order precisely to give us the freedom to choose to love or not to love. And Jesus talks about this in the Gospels, right? He says, this evil generation would not believe even if someone rose from the dead. So Jesus himself seems to point at the idea that even miraculous signs like someone rising from the dead is not enough to, as it were, prompt people to love God in this life. So anyway, so that's sort of my way of thinking about it.
Yep. So I recently had a conversation with Alex O'Connor apropos of the theme, and a related issue that came up is, okay, well, why aren't these people able to acknowledge the things which appear before their eyes? And he'll point to the kind of unfairness, as it were, of the distribution of gifts, both natural and supernatural. It's like some people are born in the bush and some people are born in a cultivated environment, exposed to the gospel in a way that's easy for them to absorb because it's mediated by loving parents. And that's just like basically that there's so much inequity in the distribution of goods that the people who are shortchanged would seem to have less access or a diminished access to this revelation and mediation, and thus a kind of compromised culpability, or in its most extreme forms, that some people just stand no chance, I think would be the atheist's argument. So it's like that's all well and good for the kind of mid-tier individual who's doing what he can or what lies within his power to read the signs and read them well. But it seems like there are some people who are just entirely unsuited, or there are some people whose basically life has made them so that they're not able to. Is there a way in which to kind of transition or pivot from arguments about divine hiddenness to, the kind of sense or wisdom of the inequitable, if that's a word, or unequal distribution of this kind of manifestation or communication?
Well, Aquinas thinks that there is in creation an unequal distribution of things. So God loves the Virgin Mary more than he loves me. And I think that's fine. I mean, the Virgin Mary is the Virgin Mary. And so God loves diversity. God made a whole bunch of different kinds of creatures and things. And in that distribution, all human beings are roughly, you might say, in the middle. In other words, we're not rocks, we're not dogs, we're not cats, but we're not angels either. So in terms of created beings, we're kind of middle register. But even within human beings, there's a Virgin Mary, and then I don't know who the poor soul is that's at the opposite extreme, but whoever that poor soul is, maybe Judas or something. But whether you're the Virgin Mary or Judas, God gives all human beings great goodness by making them human. And God gives all human beings the possibility of responding to his grace. So God wills that all people are saved. So let's say, we don't know this for sure, but let's say Judas wasn't saved and is in hell. I mean, it looks bad for him. If I had to guess, I think he probably is in hell, but we don't know that. It doesn't say he's in hell. It's possible he was hanging himself in the very last second before he died. He repented and made his way into purgatory. In any case, God wills that all people are saved, but God also wills a diversity even in the human family, right? People are called to different vocations, some higher and some lower. Some people are given extraordinary graces like the Virgin Mary and St. Dominic and St. Thomas Aquinas. I mean, those people are way, way, way above me. And I think that's fine. I mean, I'm happy to be here and happy to have the gifts I have, and God calls me to do the best I can with my gifts. So if you think about the unequal distribution or the diversity in the human community, I think that is part of God's plan, that different people in the human community are going to play different roles, just like there's different parts of the body, and not everyone can be an eye, not everyone's a nose, not everyone's a hand. There's different parts of the body. Now, does that mean we can denigrate part of our body? No, it's all important. It's all part of our body, and every single human being is completely equal in being made in the image and likeness of God, and it's completely equal in the sense that if anyone is damned, it's because of ultimately their rejection of God's help, because God wants everyone to be saved. So there's both an inequality, but also at a deeper level, fundamental equality in our dignity as human beings.
Okay, so the book is Believable. It seems that it relies upon its audience to take interest in the question, and certainly it's addressed to those who might be undecided as to the rationality of belief or the kind of grounds for warranted Christian belief. And yet, we're in a kind of social political dispensation which seems largely indifferent to the truth, or at least it gives kind of evidence of being indifferent to the truth. So we talk about like fake news or alternative facts. Mm-hmm. And I think like a lot of people's media consumption habits would seem to suggest that they're not too terribly interested in what actually happened, more so interested in kind of finding their tribe, finding their clan, finding their squad, and then ranging themselves against those on the other side of the issue for reasons of social cohesion and whatever, identification, which is fascinating. I was reading, I don't know if you read Stuart Clem's book on lying and truthfulness.
I didn't. No, I read... I think I read a review of it, but I haven't read the book itself.
Right. I'm realizing that I asked you this question yesterday. Sorry. Okay, so I have it on the mind because it's the last chapter in the book is about truth and difference. Mm-hmm. So like, I think for this book to get in the hands of a person who might be helped by it, there are a lot of kind of social and political factors which would seem to be ranged against us. So like, how do you, even just within the book, presuming a person has picked it up, how do you motivate the question? Like how do you help people uncover the urgency of the question? Or like, I mean, natural theology broadly conceived, like why is it that people should care? If they do care, why should they care more? Thoughts?
Well, I've had a lot of experience kind of motivating people to get interested in these issues because the book is basically based on a course I've taught at Loyola Marymount for quite a while called The God of Faith and Reason. Okay. So basically when I come into class, there are some Catholic schools that have extremely devout student body, and half the student body goes to mass every day, things like that. Well, at LMU, that's not the case. So let's say I have 30 students there. I will have 2 or 3 of those 30 that are serious Catholics that really care and really serious in their life of prayer and things like that. But then I'll also have 2, 3, 4 that have blue hair, they, them pronouns, just totally coming from a different perspective. And then in the middle, I'll have most students who are like raised Catholic and go to mass at Christmas with grandma, but I go to Easter, maybe, we'll see. It depends on when brunch is, and just very lax and very non-devout. Mm-hmm. But the interesting thing is almost all these students share a common belief. And the belief is that faith and reason are fundamentally opposed, right? So a lot of my serious Catholic students think this, and they choose faith. My blue-haired students, the green-haired students, they think this, and they choose reason. And then the people in the middle basically choose reason too, or what they take to be reason. So basically the book is a version of the course which is meant to open up a possibility that most of these students, almost all of them, have never even considered. And that would be the possibility that it's a misconception to think of faith and reason like 2 UFC fighters locked in the octagon, and one's going to have to win, and they're just going to fight it out to the death. Rather, faith and reason can be like St. John Paul II talked about, like 2 wings that allow the human person to move up towards the truth. So that is what I'm kind of proposing in the book. And I think because of my experience in the classroom with students that are very indifferent or even opposed, the book is really crafted to try to be as engaging as possible to, again, those sorts of people. So I'm hopeful. I'm not so hopeful that the blue-haired student will go to Barnes & Noble and see it on the shelf and take it out. But I would be hopeful that people who love the blue-haired student would use it as a book in the classroom, or maybe a parent giving it to a student. And I've written it in such a way that the chapters are typically pretty short, so 900 words, let's say. Wow. So little bite-sized chapters. And so I think that facilitates people using it too. Because if they pick up a book and it's, 500-page book and each chapter is 150 pages, I think it can be a little intimidating for people. So this is meant to be short, have some humor, have some, fun anecdotes. And again, it's based on this experience of teaching. And if you teach for a long time, I think you get a sense of kind of what lands with people and what doesn't, because you make a joke and no one laughs. You're like, okay, well, I better not use that one again.
Moving on.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm thinking of like C.S. Lewis in writing Mere Christianity. He appeals to the moral law as that kind of entry point for a semi-sympathetic or maybe mildly unsympathetic reader who might need some motivation to see the coherence of the Christian claim. In this particular book, like where do you think are where is the point, or where are the points of entry where you've chosen to kind of bring people in or onboard them to the Christian claim?
Well, the first part of the book is basically to remove objections to belief in God. But then the second part gets into reasons to think that there is a God. So I have expositions of a number of different arguments for that belief. And so one of them is the Kalam cosmological argument, put forward quite famously by William Lane Craig. And I have a version of Augustine's argument from Truth. And that chapter is called If 2 + 2 = 4, Then God Exists. And it basically says, look, if there are truths, like mathematical truths, they have to be truths that don't depend on any human mind. So a mathematical truth isn't just a material thing that exists. I mean, there are material representations of it, like in a math book, but the truth is something that exists in your mind and in my mind, and not just in math books and on chalkboards and things like that.
Yep.
But if our minds were destroyed, and if all human minds were destroyed, it still would be the case that 2 + 2 = 4. So it can't merely exist in the material order. It can't merely exist in human-created minds. That's a kind of truth that exists forever. It exists in the mind of God. So if it's really true that 2 + 2 = 4, and that truth is true, in every time, in every place, etc., then there has to be a divine mind. So this is kind of based on Augustine's argument for God's existence from truths like 2 + 2 = 4.
Yeah. Okay. So Kalam cosmological argument, this particular argument that you just sketched,
and also the not all the 5 ways, but the first way and second way, the way from motion, the way from causality.
Okay. All right. So I know that the Kalam cosmological argument, at least in contemporary like Anglo-analytic literature, has caused a lot of hubbub or brouhaha. A lot of people that think that it works, a lot of people that think that it don't work. Maybe zooming out on the basis of that observation, like how helpful, because when it comes to arguments, it seems like what we're often doing is situating people within a kind of constellation. I don't know that a lot of people are able to kind of follow things through to demonstration or in demonstrative fashion. So it's like we're doing a lot with like heuristics and adumbrations and giving people sketches and images and metaphors and whatever else as a way by which to help them see. So, like, do you think the Kalam cosmological argument obtains? And if not, is it still, I mean, you included it in the book, so is it still useful? Is it still helpful?
Yeah, I think it does obtain, and I do think it's useful. So I know that Aquinas called the argument into question, because Aquinas' view, as you know, is that whether the universe is eternal or not is not a truth, Aquinas thought, that you could know by natural reason. And I have an enormous respect for Aquinas, but I do think that since 1274, we've advanced a lot in terms of our scientific knowledge. And I'm not a scientist, but my understanding of the scientific literature is that the view that the universe is about 15 billion years old is about as well established as any scientific truth can be. There are multiple converging lines of evidence that all point to the universe having a beginning. From the expansion of the universe to the cooling of the universe to the distribution of radiation in the universe, measurements given by the Hubble telescope. I mean, there's, again, converging lines of evidence that all point to the same conclusion. So I think if Aquinas were alive today, he might revise some of his beliefs in light of current scientific understandings, because in his own day, he was very much interested in understanding the best possible scientific understandings of things. I mean, he was a student of Albert the Great, as you know, and Albert wanted to understand as much as possible the world, in terms of what we would today call the scientific understanding of the world. And Aquinas shared that. And that's why he was so eager to have accurate translations of Aristotle, because in his day, Aristotle was the cutting edge of science, the best understanding of the world that was available in the 13th century. So I think that Aquinas would accept the contemporary scientific conclusion that the universe, all time, all space, and all matter, does have a beginning. Now, if you grant that premise, then the other premise Aquinas already did accept, right? That anything with a beginning has a cause. So you put those premises together, then the universe has a cause. And then what does the cause of the universe have to be? Well, if it's the cause of all time, it has to be somehow prior to time. If it's the cause of all matter, it has to be prior to matter. If it's the cause of all time, all space, and all matter, obviously it's massively, unbelievably powerful. So what do you call something that's prior to time, outside of time? You could call it eternal. What do you call something that's prior to matter, outside of all matter? You could call it immaterial or spiritual. What do you call something that's so massively powerful that it creates all time, all space, and all matter? You could say this is massively powerful being. And so what's the word in English we use for an immaterial, spiritual, massively powerful being that brings about all time, all space, and all matter? Well, the English word most people would use for that would be God. But you don't have to call it God. You could call it the creator, the first cause. It doesn't matter what you call it, really. But it seems to me that conclusion is one that is even more reasonable to believe in now than it was in Aquinas' time. Because in Aquinas' own time, as you know, other scholars like St. Bonaventure did defend the Kalam cosmological argument, did think that it worked.
Right. So tangentially, did you visit St. Albert the Great's tomb when you were in Cologne?
I did.
Yeah, I bopped there for like 7 seconds because I had a layover, and it's like not too far of a walk from the train station. But
do you know who else is buried in Cologne?
I don't.
Scotus.
Oh, is that so?
Yep.
Wild. Okay, I went to Sankt Georgenskirche, like the one that's like the octagon.
Yeah.
Like strange orientation. And there were a couple of the Theban martyrs there who are like all throughout the German-speaking world, because there's like this Theban legion was killed in this valley in southern Switzerland for their protestation of the Catholic faith. But you have some of them in like Solothurn, in Zurich, in Cologne, in various places. But I was glad to, whatever.
Yeah.
It's cool. Oh, yeah, I think it's the Abbey of St. in that valley in Switzerland where you have also the relics of the first of their ranks. Okay, so maybe next question is like, when it comes to natural theology, I don't know if people are out there asking, I'm here asking, like how much can you prove? Like when we say the preambles of the faith, most people agree that you can prove. I mean, most Catholics working within this philosophical space will agree that you can prove the existence of God. I mean, Catholics are dogmatically committed to it by Dei Filius. But then, going from there, a lot of people are like simplicity, no problem, perfection, okay, goodness after a manner, immutability, like things get murkier. But by the time you get to providence, a lot of people are off board.
Yeah.
How far do you go, or how far are you willing to go?
I'm willing to go as far as Aquinas goes.
Okay.
So if you look at the Summa Contra Gentiles, in that work, it's a work of natural theology, I take it to be. And he argues not only that God exists, but that God has to be not composed, and that God has to be having a will, and that God has to be intelligent, and that actually he goes so far as to argue that God has to be love. And that is something that even people have heard of the idea that you can have arguments from reason that God exists, or that there's only one God. If you talk about God being love, that seems like something, this must be a matter of just revelation, a mystery of faith that's revealed by God. And it is revealed by God, but Aquinas seems to think it's not just a mystery of faith, that you can actually know on the basis of reason that there is a God who loves. I think that there's only one God is another matter that can be known through reason. So I basically go with Aquinas, and everything he thinks can be argued on the basis of reason. I agree with him.
Okay, this would be more like, a nerd question for those interested in these types of things. So I think a lot of folks who read Aquinas are more familiar with the account that he gives in the Prima Pars. So like the ordering of simplicity, perfection, goodness, immutability, eternity, omnipresence, infinity, unity. Brief pause. intellect, ideas, truth, falsity, life, will, love, justice, mercy, providence, predestination, book of life, power, beatitude. Are there important ways in which the Summa Contra Gentiles departs from the exposition in the Prima Pars? Like he gives more time or more space to certain issues?
Yes.
Are there certain of those things that really leap off the page and draw you in?
Yes. So the Summa Contra Gentiles does differ quite significantly from the Summa Theologiae in a number of ways. Obviously, the most obvious difference is the structure. So the Summa Theologiae, as you know, is a series of questions, whether God exists, whether God has a will. The Summa Contra Gentiles is not like that. It's more written like most contemporary philosophy is, where it's just a sort of chapter on this, a chapter on that, without the questions, without the objections first, and then the responses after. A second key difference is that in the Summa Contra Gentiles, he has an enormously long and unbelievably complex argument for God's existence from motion. So it's chapter 13 in the Summa Contra Gentiles, and it is 15 or 20 pages, very, very complex argumentation. And I've read a lot of secondary literature on it that tries to simplify it and make sense of it. And as far as I can tell, there's not a scholarly consensus about how to interpret it. But it is very, very long, very, very complex, very much unlike the Summa Theologiae, which is just a paragraph, very simple. A third way in which it differs is that the ordering of topics of exposition differs quite significantly.
Okay.
So in the Summa Contra Gentiles, you have a discussion of apophatic theology at the beginning, and then you have a discussion of God's intelligence and God's will, and then after that you have a discussion of that there can only, if I'm remembering correctly, I don't have the book in front of me, so I think it's the case, if I remember correctly, that after that comes the one God, and then you have a discussion of God as truth. So the order of topics, I know this is true, the order of topics, which comes first, which comes second, differs between the Summa Theologiae and the Summa Contra Gentiles. So Thomas reordered the presentation of the characteristics of God.
Yeah. And is that, he wrote the Summa Contra Gentiles earlier, but like parts of it concurrently with the Summa Theologiae, which it seems like the Gentiles he would have finished by 68. The Summa Theologiae would have started in 66. So not at too great of a remove. But do you think that that's in part adapted to the audience, for a more apologetic or even charismatic, and then versus a more formative / mystagogic? Do you think that's part of what's at stake?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the Summa Theologiae, as it says in the beginning, is written for beginners. And when people read that and they think, well, I'm in high school, I can read this. I remember picking it up first, the Summa Theologiae, not the whole thing, but part of it, when I was in 4th grade. And I opened it up.
That's awesome.
Yeah, well, it's a little less awesome when I continue the story. So my mom told me not to get into her books from college. They're up in the attic. So, of course, she leaves the house. What do? Get into her books. So I go up there, open up. It was the Pages version. Yeah. And I open it up. Is theology a science? Start reading it. And I could read every word, but I had no idea what this meant. It just was completely, even though every word was clear, put it together was completely beyond me. So I had no idea what it meant. And so when Aquinas says for beginners, he doesn't mean 4th graders, right?
Yeah.
He doesn't mean 8th graders. He means beginners, what we would today say beginners in doctoral studies, right? People that are, know their Aristotle inside and out, have had a college education, and now are starting graduate work in theology or something. So that's what it means, beginners in graduate school. Anyway, so yeah, I think the Summa Contra Gentiles and the Summa Theologiae have different audiences. I would say, though, the dating of things is, I think, a little more murky than we just don't have timestamps that say, oh, this is when it started, that's when it stopped. And yes, of course, we know, say, Thomas's commentary on the sentences was earlier than the Summa Theologiae. Yes, of course, we know that. But exactly this started in 1268. I'm not sure we really know that for sure. And if you look at very eminent scholars like Terrell and James Weishaupt, sometimes they disagree. And it's well, look, if those two people don't agree, it's I'm not sure we really know. Yeah. So what you have is kind of maybe a matter of probability. And okay, well, seems more likely that this was later. But you also have the problem that it seems according to many ways of dating, Aquinas has this almost superhuman outpouring of stuff that, maybe would make more sense to say that he was more consistently productive than over this 10-year period he just produced a gazillion books at once. Maybe, and I know he worked with, multiple people taking notes and okay. But anyway, I'm not convinced that we have 100% accurate dating on all these works, other than in a very broad way. Yes, of course, the scriptum was first, the summa was last. Okay, but yeah, I'm not convinced of all the other things.
I realized that in my graduate work because I was working off an old edition of Terrell. There have been, revisions, especially of the dating.
Right.
And it's in part because he was responding to criticisms or reviews of his work very humbly, deferently at the age of 90, releasing the third edition of St. Thomas' Life and Work, within the last 7 years, which is wild. But I didn't have the most recent volume, and his dating, on the commentaries on the letters of St. Paul and stuff like that, had moved around a little bit, or at least I had misprized what they were according to current consensus. So
yeah. Well, I have enormous respect for Jean-Pierre Terrell. I was really lucky to be able to meet him once in Freiburg, and I sent him something I wrote about Aquinas' commentary on the Nicomachean Ethics and other commentaries too. And there's a discussion that you may be familiar with in literature of basically, well, what are these commentaries? Are these merely kind of notes that don't reflect Aquinas' own views on the subject addressed, or are these commentaries that also are expressive of Aquinas' own views on various things? So everybody would agree that one genre of medieval theological writing is the commentary. And everyone would agree in biblical commentaries, if Thomas writes a commentary on the Gospel of John, he's not merely trying to explain what John says, and he doesn't personally sign on to this. No, if he thinks it's both what the gospel writer is saying, and also he signs on to it.
Yep.
So anyway, there's a dispute similar to that about Aristotle, his commentaries on Aristotle. So anyway, I sent Father Terrell my essay, and then when I was in Freiburg, we talked about it together, and I was really very touched because he is he's arguably the most prominent scholar of Thomas Aquinas in the whole world.
Yep.
So, he's absolutely top flight. And then at the time I think I was no longer a graduate student, but I was a really young professor, and, he didn't need to make time for just a mere little professor just starting his career, but he did. And I was really impressed with his generosity and his comments, and I was very impressed with him.
Yeah. Yeah, and here's a guy who has written, I think he's 95 now, but everything that he's published from which we profited most has been in the last 30 years, which is after his retirement, because in Switzerland it's mandatory retirement at 65, which, I like to meditate on that sometimes.
Yeah. Well, there are these people who are unbelievably productive in the second half of their life. So another example of that is Alistair MacIntyre.
Okay.
So, he wrote After Virtue. I think he was 55 or something at the time. So he wasn't a young man. And then, everything he wrote after that. 3 rival versions of moral inquiry, dependent rational animals. Yep. He's had an unbelievable production after, in middle age, basically, or later. And even when he was 93, he was still giving public lectures at Notre Dame. So it's that's impressive. I'd love, who knows how long I'll live, but I'd love to be productive like that.
Yeah.
Another one who's like that is Peter Kraft.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So he's 86, I want to say. And he seems to write 3 books a year or something. So it's wow, I would love, he's still a full-time professor.
Is he really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's where, Boston College or
Boston
King's?
College, yeah. So it's wow, that's the kind of service that really is incredibly impressive.
Yep.
He's, there's other people like that too, but that's certainly a model for me.
Yeah. I know. I just opened up the most recent edition of First Things, and the inside cover is an Ignatius Press advertisement for a few of Peter Kraft's most recent publications.
Right.
It's just, it's staggering.
Yeah.
So, some people just are built different. Okay, so maybe just as a final question or two, other things in the book is Believable. That, so you talked about your experience of researching more on the question of divine hiddenness.
Yeah.
Are there other kind of vignettes or little sections by which you were especially, moved, formed, shaped, or subsequently like excited, gratified, whatever, like things that kind of stick out to you in the book as remarkable, noteworthy, good?
Yeah, so in the very beginning of the book, I talk about actually a family situation that I think is remarkable. So my father-in-law, his name was Dennis Turner. He left the Catholic Church when he was in about 1972, and he was, I think, 24 or 5 at the time, and basically came out as gay. He left my mother-in-law, left her with 2 kids, and went on to live a kind of gay lifestyle. And, he was also kind of somebody who was opinionated and difficult to get along with, basically. And so, I got married to my wife, Jennifer, and I was always so impressed by how she kept up a good relationship with him and would call him and send him a Father's Day gift. And I just was so impressed how she was such a good daughter, because I thought, there's a lot of daughters who would just say, you know what, Dad, you're going to do this, leave us without child support and, abandon the family and go off and do your thing. I'm out. I don't want to be your daughter anymore. We're not going to talk. But she didn't do that at all. And so I got to know him also a little bit. He lived for a time in Los Angeles, but then he moved to New York, and he was legally married to a man. And when my wife and I spent some time in Princeton for a year, Princeton's is relatively close to New York. So we went into New York City to see him probably about every 3 weeks or so. So we got to know him better and have a stronger relationship with him. And so over the course of the year, we would go out and visit him a lot. And, we just kind of kept it light. We talk about, shows and Broadway and whatever. And anyway, so it came, time for us to go back to Los Angeles. And then, over the course of the year, Dennis, my father-in-law, became more and more ill. He basically kind of was deteriorating, getting more and more sick. And basically, he was heading towards death. And so we met with him the last time in New York City, and he and Claudio helped give us a few mementos from them and some different things. And so, we were saying goodbye to them, and this was for the last time, because I knew he was gonna die. And so his legal husband, Claudio, said to me, Chris, when I met you, I was terrified because, I'm a Jew, I'm an atheist, I'm gay, and I thought you would just hate me. But you've never been anything but really loving and kind to me. And then, Jennifer said goodbye to her dad, and it was really sad because, this is the last time they'll ever see each other. So we moved back to Los Angeles, Jennifer and I, and Jennifer, keeps up with her dad, and he gets more and more and more sick. So finally he's entered into the hospital, and we're talking to the nurse on the phone, and the nurse is like, he's going to die in probably a week, maybe less. And so I said to my wife, maybe we should try to get a priest in there, and, hopefully he can get anointing of the sick, last rites, and confession. And so my wife reached out to her dad and said, hey, Dad, since you're so sick, we can have a priest come in and give you last rites. And he was like, I don't need last rites. I'm okay. He said, well, okay, how about not last rites? We'll have just a priest give you anointing of the sick, because you are sick. He said, oh, anointing of the sick, that'll be fine. So the priest comes in, gives him anointing of the sick, hears his confession, gives him his last Holy Communion. And the last picture we have of her dad, he's got a crucifix in his hand. And for me, that is such an amazing testimony to the loving of my wife for her dad, that despite all the difficulties and the conflicts they had over the years, that she still loved him, and she loved him enough to seek what was really good for him at the end. And so even though he was away from the church for, I think, over 50 years, he ended up coming back to the church at the very end.
Wow. Yeah. No, that's beautiful. My father's parents, they were married in the Catholic Church. My father's mother was Catholic. My father's father was Methodist. But I guess in the particular ecclesial tradition in which he was raised, you would defer baptism for a time. Like you wouldn't necessarily do infant baptism, or at the very least, he himself had not been baptized as an infant. But then he never chose to be baptized. He went with my father's family to church. You know, he went to mass every week. He didn't worship in his own tradition. But like my grandma died, and he lived for like another 10 years. And he was in one of these kind of step down, step up communities where you can do like independent living and then assisted living and then skilled nursing. Yeah. And there was like a Protestant chaplain who would come through with some frequency and just chat with people who cared to be chat with.
Right.
And they struck up a friendship. And, you know, by the end, my grandpa was ready to be baptized. Like at the age of 97, my grandpa was baptized.
Wow, 97.
So you just think about like the wild ways in which the Lord reconciles us to himself. So it's fodder for Thanksgiving.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. All right. Thanks so much for taking the time. Thanks so much for having the conversation. It's cool to broach some of the subjects and think more about what folks can find in the book. Where is it published, or is it to be published?
So it's not out yet, but it will be published in September 2025.
Perfect. We might just line up the release of this to like a month beforehand. So
sounds great.
Yeah. And it's available where books are sold.
Correct.
Nice.
Yeah.
With the internet now, one need not specify too terribly much where fingers can type. Great. All right. Well, then turning to you, the viewer, the listener, thanks so much for tuning into this episode of Godsplaining. If you haven't yet, subscribe on your podcast app or on YouTube. And if you leave a 5-star review and a cool comment, that helps to get the word out. So we're grateful. You can follow Godsplaining on the various social media channels that we have. I don't know which ones, but I think they're out there. And then if you follow links in the description or show notes, you can shop merchandise, contribute to the podcast through Patreon, for which we're super grateful, and then learn about upcoming Godsplaining events. So know of our prayers for you. Please pray for us, and we'll look forward to chatting with you next time on Godsplaining.